Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the First World Manila podcast. My name is Ramon Rodrigo Calao Cuenca, CFA. I am the founder and director of First World Manila, which is a brand that makes long-term economic and urban development, as well as cultural revitalization, interesting and accessible to a wider audience. This is for the Philippines, obviously. Manila and the Philippines. Okay, today's episode is going to be about smart shaming. And before I start, I just want to give you guys an update on what I've been doing with this brand. I'm thinking about making this podcast weekly just because I have so many things going on, building this brand, creating the content, and doing things on the business end, as well as my other brand, my international brand, which is art and finance. But that's a separate issue. But anyways, suffice it to say that I am doing so many things. I mean, this is all a one-man show, so I think making this podcast weekly makes more sense. Anyways, I'm still figuring things out and playing along, and once I get a set schedule and things are more in place, I'll let you know. But yeah, let's keep it weekly, I guess. Let's say every Tuesday I'll release this podcast. And of course, the new YouTube video is coming out very soon on Ube, sometime this month. Okay, so back to the topic at hand: smart shaming in Manila and the Philippines. No more smart shaming. I chose this topic today because a few days ago I was talking with my friend. I work at a co-working space, and I was talking to one of my friends there, Randall. And I don't know what we were talking about. We always get into these late night because him and I stay till way past like closing time, sometimes till midnight or past midnight, working. We're both grinding, and we end up having philosophical talks. And we were talking about Manila and Philippine society, and then he brought up smart shaming as a problem. I don't remember what we were talking about. He brought it up, and it really stuck with me because it's a word that I hadn't heard in a long time. I mean, I was cognizant of smart shaming, but I really didn't think about it as an issue in Philippine society, or I didn't think too deeply about it until recently when I started First World Manila. So now that I'm doing this brand that's about revitalizing our culture and using that to make economic and urban development in Manila and the Philippines interesting, smart shaming is something I'm really thinking about because obviously if it's a problem, if it's a broader problem in our culture, in our society, then it's obviously something that has to be fixed because we want people to work hard and do their best and improve their way of life and standard of living, and we want obviously society to reflect that. Um, so he brought that up maybe last week, my friend Randall, and maybe the same day or the maybe a day or two after, I was watching this YouTube video about this guy, this American he was basically just talking about his background. He's very successful, financially and professionally, and he was talking about how growing up in a maybe a poorer part of American society, that his peers and the people around him were just saying things like, it was cool to get bad grades and be and rebel and stuff like that, and not really do anything to really improve your life, but like to really just to rebel, and you had to fit in and not do well for yourself just to fit in. And I remember listening to that and thinking, wow, that's something that I had felt growing up here in Manila, even though I went to ISM, International School Manila, which is, I guess you could call it one of the top schools here, one of the most elite schools, and I felt the same thing growing up here, that I always felt pressured to conform, not to get good grades, not to go take the advanced classes. And it was interesting because what this guy was saying, this American was saying, was that he actually transferred to a prep school in a better part of town, that basically, and he was shocked that the people there, they were from generally from better income families, but it was cool to try hard and do your best and get better grades. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but generally people were more concerned about it. And he was basically saying that this is sort of the mentality of people who are financially more successful. They get there by hard work and talent and merit, versus maybe more of a more poor, even poverty mentality. And it's weird because that sort of mirrored my own experience too, because I actually did not graduate from ISM. I graduated from boarding school. I went to boarding school in the U.S. I graduated early 2000s and from boarding school, and the people there were just so different. There were people who I mean, okay, there were people who weren't so great in grades, and there were people who obviously rebelled, but there were kids who were also interested in really just doing their best, getting good grades and studying, working hard and getting to the best college or university. And that was even more so when I went to university in the U.S. I went to the University of Chicago, and that's a very intense school, and people there were really concerned with, generally speaking, of doing well and bettering their lives. And it's just interesting that there's sort of that difference in mentality, and maybe you can chalk some of it up to kids being kids, and excuse me, and people and teenagers rebelling against the system. There's always some of that, but still, the fact that there were kids who weren't completely rebelling, and it was generally considered cool to get better grades in some schools or some places, really in some different parts of society, really makes really is interesting to me. And the reason why I bring this up is that the whole thing about being cool, not getting good grades and not studying in like if we link it to like a poverty mentality in the U.S., it's interesting that I went to ISM, which sort of like a lot of society, at least back then, a lot of society kids went to, Manila society kids, and for them it wasn't cool to get good grades. And I wonder in some ways if it's almost a poverty mentality reflecting our country, because ideally in the Philippines, at least I mean, theoretically, if you have people who are richer, maybe someone in their family worked hard to get rich. That might not, and it was theoretically maybe by merit, and sometimes that is the case, sometimes it is not. Obviously, we can talk a bit later, and maybe on another episode, about the way our society developed, and was it through merit and hard work and innovation, or I mean, and obviously that does exist, but maybe it's also because some people historically got rich after we became free from Spain, because they were awarded land and just had to sit there and not do anything and just live off agriculture. And I wonder because of that. I wonder, and again, like there's lots of theories. I'm not an anthropologist or sociologist or anything like that as to why smart shaming might be prevalent in our culture. But maybe that's one reason that a lot of the elite historically were rich because of just because of land, and not really because of dint of or merit, or dint of hard work. So maybe that does have an impact. I don't know. What really hit it home for me today, why I decided to talk about this topic, is because I actually came from, and again, it's what, 12:30 in midnight right now, and you're probably hearing this the following day or some other time, but it's late here as I record this. I actually came from an entrepreneur meetup uh, in BGC, and some of these entrepreneurs, a lot of them really want to make a difference and help society here. I mean, obviously some for the profit motive also, but some of them are non-profit or social enterprises, and we had a very intense discussion of talking about a lot of things. But one of the things we did talk about was how some of them were frustrated that people who are, it was interesting because what some of them were saying was that when they employed Manileños or even Filipinos in general, that if you weren't the ones who weren't from like a top three school, from Ateneo, La Salle, or UP, they had this perception that they just weren't good enough for anything, and this is my lot in life. So that's interesting, and I wonder if it's tied to smart shaming or even pakikisama or bahala na, those things, those sort of our maybe negative aspects of our culture that people, both Filipinos and non-Filipinos, tend to criticize about us, and what's maybe holding us back. Uh, I wonder if all that stuff, pakikisama, bahala na, and smart shaming, is all tied together. And it's funny because, I mean, and to be fair, some of these, there were also reports from some of these entrepreneurs, and again, this is all anecdotal, that some of these workers or employees who were not from the big three schools also, some of them, to be fair, also really wanted to improve themselves and work hard. And maybe even some of the ones who were from better school, quote unquote, better schools, really couldn't take the corporate world. I mean, I'm generalizing here, and I don't want to, stereotype people from different schools or whatever or different backgrounds. But it's interesting that that this sort of smart shaming or that kind of attitude is even reflected in the workforce in some ways, in some cases at least. Uh, and maybe this is just a one-off incident and it's not a big deal. But I did a quick internet search on Google. I just typed in "smart shaming Philippines," and there's a lot that pops up. So it's not my imagination. I'm not crazy. This is something that people do talk about here. You have like what's up with the smart shaming from Rappler, smart shaming in our Pinoy culture of anti-intellectualism on GMA Network. You have a lot. Even in Quora, what is your view on smart shaming in the Philippines? Why is smart shaming so rampant in the Philippines? Uh, even there's a smart shaming blog apparently. Um, Even in Reddit, what's up with the smart shaming? Anyways, you get the point, and it's obviously something that society has been talking about, and that's probably why when my friend Randall brought up the issue of smart shaming, it sort of rung a bell because I had heard it previously, certainly in civil society discourse that people have been talking about it, and it and even from personal experiences, I talked about how I went to IS and I felt like there was some implicit smart shaming among the Filipinos because it's interesting because IS, at least back then, obviously it's an international school and there were obviously the rich Filipinos went there, but also kids from the ADB. And I always felt because their parents are from more meritocratic backgrounds that they were a bit different. They were always there to I mean I'm generalizing, but a lot of them were getting good grades and playing sports, et cetera, et cetera. Where always felt like a lot of the Filipino, at least the rich Filipinos, not the scholars, the richer Filipinos, and myself included, there was always a pressure to conform and not be smart or not try too hard. I remember it being so bad that I actually at one point dropped out of advanced math. I went to intermediate math when I felt like I could have, in hindsight, I maybe could have done more. Although I made up for it when I went to boarding school by taking all the advanced math classes. So that's that. Let's see. So looking at my notes here. So there are some other examples I have from my own personal life. I knew someone I know really well. Like when I talk to him one on one, he's so smart, he's brilliant, he's a very talented person. But sometimes when I see him with his friends, he just kind of puts it back and just says, "Oh, I'm not smart," or "I'm not," I wish I was pretending like he's not talented or at least not talented and smart enough or capable enough to the point where he's threatening to his other friends and I find that I mean it's sad, it's depressing that he has to feel that pressure to conform, this other friend of mine, to maybe some people who are implicitly smart shaming. And again, this isn't everyone. There are obviously a lot of exceptions to this trend. And other people who do really well for themselves here and abroad. Mm. I wonder, and tying it back to like smart shipping with like pakikisama or bahala na, I wonder if it's because that a lot of people, or maybe a negative attitude of ours as a whole, is that because we're not really from a very strong merit-based society. It's like accept things as they are, and feelings matter more than getting ahead in life because things are what they are, and you can't change things no matter how hard you try, and you have to take feelings into consideration. And while there's a good part of pakikisama where you are considerate of other people, I think the negative bent on that is if you take it too far and you to the point where you're not getting anywhere. Maybe you could even say maybe perhaps pakikisama at its negative extreme is crab mentality. Maybe I'm just throwing it out there. So I'm just thinking about this stuff. Um, so there are lots of thoughts about it and solutions and criticisms and uh, concerns and things like that. You can always just Google it. Google Philippine smart shaming. You'll find a lot of stuff for you to think about. And I just want to give my 2 cents on it because this is a podcast and vlog and fine art project, among other things. That wants to bring up our standard of living and our own self perceptions and our belief in ourselves to do things and really really add something of value to this world in our lives. It starts with education and our culture, and it might be that to mitigate smart shaming is that if we have more of a society that's more based on merit, more than it is right now, if there is more of a merit-based society, and that's something I want everyone to think about, everyone who's listening to this, to think about or watching on YouTube, that it's something that we have to think about, a more merit-based society, so that ideally, if you work hard and you take the risk and you study hard, you can really improve your standard of living, and it's a fairer deal for everybody. How to get that way, and obviously, I don't need to talk to you about our very obviously very rigid class system here, and it's very hard. Social mobility is not a very easy thing in Manila and the Philippines, but uh, those policies I talked about, I think in the first podcast about visiting, about those highlighted by Arrancada. Basically, if you have a more competitive pro-business atmosphere in that sense, there's more incentive for people to work hard and really do things for themselves. So it's worth thinking about. And I think it's a positive, what economists call a positive externality from these um, these policies about on infrastructure and being able to get things done here. Obviously, if people are able to get things done more easily, we have more of a competitive society, and hence, ideally, a more merit-based society that sort of mitigates smart shaming and things like that. And I think it's good for everyone here and their children. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that. That's it for today's weekly podcast. Before I leave you, the word of today, the Spanish Tagalog word of vocabulary for today is nosotros or nosotras, tayo, so us. There's no gender in Tagalog, so it's just tayo. But in Spanish, there's nosotros for men or a group of mixed gender people, or sorry, a group of people with different genders. Well, that too. Or if it's just all women, nosotras. So nosotros, nosotras means tayo or kami. But um, there's no exclusive version of there's no differentiation in Spanish of bit like tayo and kami. But anyways, nosotros, nosotras, tayo, kami. Okay, that's it. I hope you guys and girls have a great day, and I'll see you soon.